Did you ever have to pretend everything was fine when it really wasn't?
Leave your uniform at home, my dad said, like he was asking me to bring a salad instead of a main dish, like it was just another detail on a list he'd already decided without me, and when he added, "We don't want you showing off." I realized he had wrapped my entire career, my long months away, my nights on duty, my steady spine when other people folded, into a neat little label that made him feel comfortable because it kept me smaller than him, smaller than my brother. Smaller than the family story where I was always the practical one who helped clean up after everyone else took their bows. I said sure, because that is what I have said most of my life, not because I was afraid of him, but because I learned early that saying sure buys you time, and time is helpful when you need to decide whether you are going to take the high road, the quiet road, or the road that makes people stop talking and actually look at you for once. The reunion was set for the weekend, and the awards ceremony was scheduled 2 days before it, and no one in my family had asked if I was up for anything because they never asked about that part of my life. Not really. They preferred updates about my brother's newest attempt at a startup or my cousin's vacation photos or my mother's projects that kept her busy enough to avoid any conversation that might turn uncomfortable, which meant anything that involved me, my rank, or the reality that I kept doing hard things while they pretended I was still the kid who used to fetch ice. I know I sound bitter, and maybe I am a little, because when someone tells you to hide your uniform, it is not about fabric or buttons, it is about erasing the context for your work. And the truth is that my dad has always loved being the center of the room, the one whose handshake matters, the one who introduces his children like categories on a resume that he curated. And I used to accept that because keeping the peace felt easier than challenging the script, but somewhere along the way I grew out of the role he wrote for me, and he never updated the story. He just pushed harder on the old lines. When I hung up the phone after that call, I sat there with that numb, sharp feeling that shows up when someone suggests you should be less than you are for the sake of other people's comfort, and I thought about the day I got the notice about the national award. The way my commanding officer shook my hand and said my name with respect, the way my team sent me messages that were simple and honest and heavy, and I compared that feeling with the emptiness I get when I walk into a room full of relatives who love me as long as I am easy to minimize, and I knew, in that quiet way you know when a decision has already been made in your gut, that I was not going to play small this time. I called my mom later and asked about the schedule, which was a normal question and also not normal, because I never cared about the schedule before, and she told me Dad wanted a welcome moment and a few toasts and then an open mic for family news. And she said it like the whole thing was already running on rails, and I said that sounded fine, and we moved on to other things like whether I could bring a side dish, because that is our dance, hers and mine, the one where we move around the problem and never touch it with our hands. I did not tell her about the award, and not because I wanted to blindside her, but because every time I have shared good news, it somehow gets filed under interesting but not essential. And the conversation drifts back to my brother's latest crisis and how Dad is handling it, and the truth is I was tired of giving them the chance to minimize something that mattered to me before it even happened, so I kept it for myself, which felt both selfish and sane. To be clear, I do not need my family's applause to feel legitimate. I have stood in rooms where legitimacy is measured by whether people would follow you when it gets messy, and I have passed that test, but family is different because you do not pick them. And no one else can bruise you in quite the same way, and when my dad said not to wear the uniform, I heard the old message under the new words, the one that says, "Do not threaten the hierarchy, do not disturb the fantasy that your brother is the headline and you are the footnote," and I decided the headline needed a rewrite. So I said sure, and I went about my week like nothing was happening, which is easier than you might think when you have learned to carry two truths at once, the truth you live and the truth you show. And while my mother texted me about potato salad and the playlist and whether Uncle Rob was still coming, I returned a call from the awards coordinator, confirmed the citation language, and asked one extra question that I knew would matter later, which was whether the presenter would be available on the weekend for a brief acknowledgement at a private event that meant a lot to my family, and when she said yes as long as it was short and respectful, I felt a small, steady click inside, like a gear finding its tooth. The thing about dignity is that people think it means silence, but sometimes dignity means planning, and I planned by doing very little that looked like planning, which is my favorite way to operate when the stakes are personal. And as the ceremony approached, I kept my head down, I did my work, I showed up, I accepted congratulations with a clear voice, and I did not post about it because I wanted this to land in the room where the story had been wrong for so long, and I wanted them to hear my name said out loud with the kind of weight that does not ask permission. The night before the reunion, my dad sent a group message reminding everyone of the dress code, casual and comfortable, and he repeated his line to me in a private text, a little joke, "Leave the uniform to the movies, kiddo." And I typed back something neutral and polite, because that is what you do when you are about to move the ground under someone and you need them calm until it happens. And I put my phone face down and closed my eyes and pictured the moment when my name would be called, not because I wanted to humiliate anyone, but because I wanted the truth to be undeniable in a room that had trained itself not to see it. I slept well, which surprised me, because my heart usually gallops before family events, and in the morning I packed 2 outfits, the simple dress they expected and the uniform they did not, and I set them side by side with the citation in its folder. And I stared at the choices for a long minute, thinking about my dad's voice and my mother's careful silence and my own habit of shrinking to make other people feel taller, until it was obvious which bag I was going to zip, and when I zipped it, I smiled, not big, just enough to feel it, and I thought, fine, let them see what they asked me to hide. And that was the moment I realized exactly how I was going to handle it, how I would step into that room and say almost nothing while everything shifted around me, because when the microphone changed hands and the announcement started, there would be no debate, no argument, no way to turn the story back into the old version, and none of them, not my dad, not my brother, not the chorus of cousins, had the slightest idea what was about to happen next. When people think about revenge, they imagine fireworks and speeches and grand gestures that split the room in half. But the truth is that the most effective kind of payback is mostly paperwork and phone calls and the kind of patient coordination that looks like you are just being helpful, and that is exactly how I started, by being helpful in a way no one noticed. Because I knew the reunion committee was a mix of cousins who forgot deadlines and family friends who loved clipboards and tucked. Among them was Mrs. Bennett, who has known me since I was a kid and who never once talked down to me, which made her the perfect person to call under the pretense of asking how I could pitch in so that everything ran smoothly and Dad would not be stuck doing everything himself. I told her I was worried about logistics because people fly in at different times and microphones fail and slideshows freeze and nerves make good speakers sound like they swallowed a dry sponge. And she laughed that gentle laugh and said she wished more people worried about those things instead of just showing up and criticizing from the back row. And by the time we finished our first call, I was on the run of show as an informal helper, which meant I received the draft agenda, the notes on who would be recognized, and the timing plan for announcements, and none of that looked like much. But to me it was a map with a few empty spaces where the right kind of surprise could settle in and change the tone of the whole night. I thanked her and I meant it. Then I followed up with an email to the awards coordinator from 2 days earlier, phrased like a courtesy note rather than a request, telling her that my family was hosting a reunion and that it would mean a lot if the community could share a brief acknowledgement of the national award in a mixed company setting, and I framed it as community outreach because it was true. But it was also strategic, since people are more willing to say yes when they feel they are serving a broader purpose and not stepping into a family drama. And when she replied that she could attend for a short segment and would prepare a clean, official citation reading, I felt that click again, the one that says you have shifted something without making noise. Meanwhile, with the agenda in my inbox, I volunteered to help fine-tune the transitions because dead space makes people restless and restless rooms turn mean, and my mother has a sixth sense for disharmony and starts smoothing it with chatter. And I wanted her free of that job so she would have no role to hide behind when the moment came, so I sent a tidy list of suggestions about ordering, offered to handle the playlist cues, and suggested we add a small segment called Community Honors too. Celebrate any milestones such as retirements, graduations, or public recognitions, which sounded perfectly wholesome and gave Mrs. Bennet the language to tell my father that the committee wanted to highlight more than toasts and golf stories this year. Dad loved the idea because it made the event feel like he was presiding over something official, and he even texted me a thumbs up, which I ignored on purpose, because I did not want to give him the satisfaction of thinking we were aligned. And instead, I called the venue to confirm that the sound system had a simple line-in and that the master of ceremonies would be comfortable handing off the mic to a representative from a national office, and the manager said that would be fine as long as we kept it crisp, which was perfect, because crisp is exactly how you break a habit without dragging people into a debate they already rehearsed in their heads. If you are wondering whether I felt guilty about inviting an outsider into a family event without saying it out loud, I did consider it from every angle. And then I remembered every time I stood there while someone made a joke with me as the punchline and my father pretended not to hear it, every time my brother's mediocre milestone got the full parade while my deployments were handled like a scheduling conflict, every time I was asked to be gracious so that other people could be comfortable. And the guilt dissolved into focus, as clean as a list. The first small act of revenge landed before the reunion even began, and it was simple and it tasted better than I expected, because when the updated run of show went out, the seating chart changed with it to accommodate the community honors segment. And although no one said the words out loud, a few chairs at the head table moved, and my brother lost his automatic place next to Dad because the presenter needed a spot, and so did I as the honoree, and the committee framed it as logistics, which is the best cover in the world for justice. And when my brother texted me a salty line about how he guessed he was demoted to the overflow table, I replied that I was sure he would make it fun over there, which he did not find funny, but Mrs. Bennet did. My mother called in a low voice to ask if I knew why the seating changed, and I told her the truth in pieces that were small enough to swallow. That the committee added a community honors segment, and that someone from the award office might stop by because they happened to be in town. And she murmured something about how it would be nice to keep things simple this year because last year got loud when Uncle Rob brought up politics, and I said I agreed completely and that the whole point of this was to keep it simple and respectful and brief, which was true and also not the point at all, but she sounded relieved and I left it there because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is not ask a person to change right before you show them that you already have. The second small act of revenge was pettier, and I will own that without apology, because I requested the introductions be standardized so no one would feel singled out, which meant the MC would read full names and titles for people who had them and simple names for people who did not, and that change alone would make my father's usual habit of trimming me down to a shorthand impossible. And when I previewed the script, seeing my rank spelled correctly next to my full name put a weight on the page that I knew would carry in the room, and I thought, fine, if we are doing respect, let us do it cleanly and for everyone to hear. All this happened quietly while the group chat debated potato salad and which playlist version had fewer sad songs and whether we needed more chairs, and while they were busy with the stuff that fills space. I kept moving pieces into place with a calm I did not expect to feel, because for once I was not trying to win an argument. I was building a scene with hard edges and no exits, and when it started, people would either recognize reality or sit in silence, which honestly would be just as useful. Then Mrs. Bennet forwarded me the final head count and added a little note that she heard my father had invited a few contacts from his board and a couple of old colleagues he always tries to impress. The kind of people who like to be close to power and who expect a certain shine on the evening, and I sat there with that message and felt a slow grin I did not show anyone, because if there is one thing my dad hates more than being challenged, it is being challenged in front of people whose opinions he collects like trophies, and suddenly the stakes shifted from family discomfort to public recalibration, which is not just revenge, it is a correction written in large letters, and I knew, right then, that this was going to land harder than I planned. Because the audience would include the exact people who bought his version of me and would be forced to update it in real time. So I told the awards coordinator that timing mattered and that a brief citation right after my father's welcome would be ideal. Not to undercut him, I said, but to set the tone for the evening, and she agreed because it sounded organized and respectful. And I confirmed the final script with the MC so there would be no ad-libbing or cutesy comments that turned serious things into anecdotes, and with those last pieces clicked in, I put my phone down and let the plan breathe, because good plans do not need a drum roll, they just need a clock and a door. And then, right when everything looked locked and airtight, I got a text I did not expect from a number I had not seen in years, a cousin who rarely shows up for anything, saying he heard a rumor about me planning a moment and asking whether Dad knew. And the way he phrased it told me someone was already talking out of turn, which meant a leak had started somewhere inside the family group, and I realized that the next move would decide whether the whole thing stayed clean and undeniable or turned into a preemptive scramble, and that was the moment I understood that the plan had an enemy I had not accounted for, one who loved the old order too much to let it fall quietly. The text from my cousin sat there like a warning light that could mean anything from a loose gas cap to a failing engine, so I called him instead of feeding the family rumor machine another crumb, and the way he answered, cautious and cheerful in that fake way people use when they are about to tell you something they should not know, told me exactly what I needed before he even said the words, which was that my brother had been running his mouth in a way that sounded like concern but carried the same old message about keeping me manageable, and he had framed it as protecting Dad from embarrassment, as if my existence, in uniform or not, was a grenade he was bravely kicking under a table. I thanked my cousin for the heads up without confirming anything, told him the plan, if there even was a plan, was really just about keeping things smooth so Dad could have his moment without chaos, which is the kind of sentence that puts men like my brother to sleep because they hear the word smooth and think compliance, and after we hung up I sat there with the familiar tug between anger and strategy, and I chose strategy, because anger makes me fast and sloppy, and strategy makes me slow and dangerous. I called my brother directly, not to fight, but to listen for what he was afraid of losing, because the thing people defend tells you where to lean, and he answered on the second ring with that bored tone he puts on when he wants to sound above the fray. And he said he heard there might be some kind of segment about me, and Dad would not appreciate a scene, and if I cared about the family, I would just keep it simple, which is a beautiful little speech from someone who has never once made anything simple for anyone but himself, so I told him I agreed 100% that there should be no scene, and that if he really wanted to protect Dad's evening the best thing he could do was help with logistics, because nothing ruins a program faster than dead air and confusion. And he bit down on that idea like a hungry fish, because logistics makes him feel like a decision-maker without requiring actual competence. He said he could take the mic around the room and manage the order of speakers and keep things moving, and I told him that would be perfect and that I would text Mrs. Bennett to add him to the team. And he made a little satisfied noise that told me he thought he had reasserted control, which was fine by me because while he was busy polishing his fake authority, I was securing the part that mattered, which was making sure the hand that moved the mic would belong to him when the award presenter arrived, so that if anyone felt blindsided it would be because my brother placed the moment directly into the center of the room. I texted Mrs. Bennett that my brother was eager to help and good with a mic, which is not true but also not false in the only way that counts. And she was thrilled because volunteers always vanish on event day, and a strong body is a strong body when you have to wrangle people. And I followed up with the awards coordinator to confirm her arrival time and the exact words of the citation, asking her, very calmly, to use my full name and rank and the formal title of the national award with no embellishment and no jokes, because this was not a performance, this was a correction, and she agreed with that crisp professionalism that reassures the nervous part of your brain that cannot sleep until every hinge is tightened. My mother left me a voicemail that afternoon in her gentle, practical voice, saying she heard I might have a little congratulations during the program and could we keep it short because Dad had a lot of people to thank and she did not want anyone to feel left out. And I stood there in my kitchen listening to a sentence that did what so many of her sentences do, which is ask me to be considerate of people who have spent years not being considerate of me, and I breathed through the ache and called her back and told her I loved the idea of short, that brief and respectful was the goal, and that the whole point was to make the evening easy for everyone, which soothed her because she believes that easy means safe. And I let her have that because sometimes protecting yourself means letting someone else hold on to the story that comforts them until the truth arrives and makes new space. With my brother installed as the unofficial master of mic traffic and the presenter's script locked, I turned to the small, quiet details that make a big room behave, because rooms respond to cues even when they think they are choosing freely. And I asked the MC to standardize every introduction and to avoid commentary between segments, and I suggested we line the first few rows with a mix of relatives who actually clap for other humans and a couple of Dad's important guests who would never risk looking stingy with applause, and that arrangement, which sounded like hospitality, was actually a fuse line because it meant that once the citation began, the first wave of clapping would be automatic and no one would want to be the person sitting on their hands while the board member 2 seats over was already on their feet. The day before the reunion, my brother texted me a smug little update that he had spoken with Dad, who agreed that uniform theatrics would be tacky and that we would keep the evening focused on family, and he said it like a victory speech. Like he had put me back into my proper size, and I typed back that I appreciated him taking initiative and that everything would be smooth and quick and he would be an asset on the floor, and I meant every word because I am never more sincere than when someone has just built me the exact stage I needed while believing he built a cage, and if that sounds cold, you have to understand how many years I spent giving people the benefit of the doubt while they took the benefit and left me with the doubt. As a small insurance policy, because I do not gamble when dealing with family, I sent the presenter the updated run of show with my brother's number marked as Mike Lead, and I asked her to approach him directly when she arrived so that he would be the first to know she was there and the one to shepherd her forward when the segment began, and that detail, that tiny arrow with his name on it, was my third act of revenge for the day, because it meant he would become the bridge for the moment he had been trying to burn, and whatever story he told later about being blindsided would collide with the much simpler truth that he had literally handed the microphone to the person announcing me. I slept that night without the usual churn because the pieces were arranged in a way that did not require me to convince anyone of anything, which is the calmest kind of power I know. And in the morning when the group chat lit up with last-minute rides and who could bring extra ice and whether the projector cable was in the box, I answered with cheerful yes and see you soons and saved my voice for the only words I actually needed, which, if we are being honest, would not have to come from me at all. And while my brother texted a final reminder that there would be no drama on his watch, tapping his chest like the keeper of order, I looked at the message from the award office confirming arrival right before my father's welcome. And I smiled the kind of smile that no one sees because it lives on the inside of your ribs. The one that says the table is set and the guests are seated and the person who thinks he is in charge is about to introduce the part of the story he has always tried to erase, which is as clean and satisfying as revenge gets without a single raised voice or broken glass, and he had no idea that in less than 1 hour he would be the one to pass the microphone to the woman he was trying to keep out. The morning of the reunion started with a calendar ping and a text from my brother that tried to sound friendly while reminding me, again, that he would be running the room and that he trusted me to keep it classy, which translated to please be small. And I answered with a thank you and a smiley spelled out in words because I was not about to give him any real emotion to chew on, and then I went back to the little checklist I had built in my head, the one that did not include his permission. Because the truth is that confidence does not come from people letting you have it, it comes from knowing exactly where you set the levers and when to pull them, and I had set them all week without raising my voice or changing my face. I called the venue to confirm the presenter's arrival window, which was still pinned to right before the welcome, and I asked them to make sure a glass of water was on the side table because people get dry when they are about to say something that matters. And the manager laughed and said I was the first family member to ask for something that practical all week, which told me everything I needed to know about how the evening would run once the machine started moving, because people who pay attention to water and microphones usually get what they came for. My mother texted to check if I needed help with makeup or hair, which is her way of offering love without touching the topic that scares her, and I told her I was set and asked if she wanted me to bring anything for the check-in table. And she said we could use extra pens, which made me smile because of all the things that matter and do not matter. Pens sit in the middle, harmless and necessary, and it felt good to deliver something that would neither inflame nor placate, just serve the evening. Without drama. About an hour later, my phone rang with my father's name across the screen, and for a second I almost let it go to voicemail because old habits still tug, but I picked up and said hi and waited. And he cleared his throat and said he hoped I remembered the spirit of the evening, that it was about togetherness and not personal spotlights, and he tossed in a joke about me saving the uniform for a parade, and I let him talk himself comfortable. Then I said I agreed the night should be smooth and that I was looking forward to seeing everyone, and I did not offer anything beyond that, which made him pause, because men who are used to control do not know what to do with a wall that looks like a smile. I arrived early on purpose with the polite dress folded in one bag and the uniform on a hanger covered by a plain garment sleeve that could have hidden a winter coat for all anyone knew. And Mrs. Bennet caught my eye from across the foyer with that quiet look people give you when they know you are carrying something delicate and they plan to protect the perimeter without asking for details. So I hugged her and checked the agenda printouts and the mic batteries and the order of names for the standardized introductions, and everything sat exactly where it belonged, which is a feeling I wish I could bottle for the days when nothing sits anywhere at all. My brother showed up carrying a clipboard like it was a trophy, and he made a point of letting me see the highlighted sections as if I did not know them already, and he announced to no one in particular that he would be queuing speakers and keeping us on schedule. Then he murmured to me that he appreciated my maturity about keeping things low-key, and I kept my face friendly and told him the floor was his, and I was grateful he had stepped up, which made him stand taller because he mistook acknowledgement for allegiance, a mistake I learned to stop making years ago. The presenter texted that she was on her way and asked where to meet the mic lead, and I replied with my brother's name and told her to look for the clipboard, which would be visible from space, and when she walked in a few minutes later, tidy and calm, she went straight to him and introduced herself and said she was ready when he was, and I watched from 2 paces away as he shifted from confusion to pride, because he heard her title and decided she was another piece of his puzzle, and he nodded with solemn importance and said he would fetch her when it was time, and I stepped back into the crowd and let that small satisfaction settle where it belonged, not as a gloat, just as confirmation that the bridge was built and he was already standing on it. In the bustle of arrivals, my mother took my arm and whispered again about keeping the recognition tasteful, and I squeezed her hand and said it would be brief and respectful, which was both a promise and a warning depending on where you stood. And she smiled with relief that made me both sad and protective, because I know she has been carrying the weight of keeping my father comfortable for longer than anyone should have to, and I did not want to fight her. I wanted to free her from a job she never applied for, and sometimes the only way to do that is to let the room do the work you cannot do with a private argument. 5 minutes before start, I stepped into a quiet corner and changed, not in a dramatic sweep, but in the careful way you prepare for something that will not be repeated, and when I fastened the last button and checked the citation folder one more time, I felt that steady internal click again, not adrenaline, not nerves, just certainty that the next 10 minutes would set a new baseline that no one in my family could push back below, and I covered the uniform with the garment sleeve again because revealing it early would have been theater, and this was not theater, this was verification. The room settled, people took seats, the MC tested the mic and handed it to my brother, who took it with both hands like a baton, and my father moved to the center with his practiced smile and his welcome speech tucked into his jacket pocket. And I watched him look over the room, scanning for the faces he wanted to impress, which were all present and alert, and I thought, this is exactly the stage he built for himself, and for the first time in my life I was not trying to take any of it away. I was just going to add something he could not remove. He opened with a warm line and a joke about parking, and a few people laughed in the safe way crowds do when they want to signal goodwill, and then he drew breath for the part where he thanks the committee and frames the evening in his own voice. And before he could take the second sentence, my brother, following the run of show that he believed was his masterpiece, stepped in with the practiced efficiency he had been rehearsing all afternoon, turned, and extended the microphone to the presenter. He had personally greeted, saying her name aloud for the room, and in that tiny, perfect handoff the whole current changed direction, because she took the mic with a nod, thanked him, and announced that before the welcome continued, the community would like to recognize a national honor awarded this week, after which she spoke my full name and my rank into a room that had never heard either without someone trimming it down, and in the space between those syllables and my father's stalled smile, I stood, the garment sleeves sliding from my shoulders like an old story falling away, and the silence that followed had weight, not confusion, not outrage, just the kind of silence that happens when the truth walks in and sits down where it should have been all along. When the presenter said my name and rank into that room that had spent years trimming me down to something portable, I stood and let the garment sleeves slide away so quietly that even the people who live on drama had nothing to grab. And I walked to the front while she read the citation in that steady, official voice that does not invite commentary, and I swear I could feel the room adjusting its posture as she described actions and decisions my family had never asked about, not because the terms were complicated, but because they were complete, and completeness is hard to ignore when you have been feeding on fragments, and even before the clapping started I saw it, the little recalibration in the faces of my father's guests, the way their eyes moved from him to me and back again as if a picture had been hung slightly higher than they expected, and now nothing else lined up unless they moved their chairs. I took the folder, shook the presenter's hand, and thanked her in that measured way you use when you want people to hear your tone as much as your words, and I turned back to the room and smiled, not wide, just present, because this was not a performance. This was a correction that did not require me to sell it, and for one long stretch of quiet, no one spoke. There was a hush that felt like a held breath, not because they were hostile, but because they were busy rewriting the story in their heads, and my father, who has never met a pause he did not fill, stared at the mic like it had betrayed him, and for once he had nothing ready to plug the gap, which told me the truth had landed in exactly the way I needed. Which is to say, without my commentary, without my pleading, without my temper, just itself, unarguable. The applause came a beat later, first from Mrs. Bennet and a couple of relatives who have always clapped for others without needing to be the center. Then from one of my father's board contacts who stood because he understands rooms and knows when standing is the correct currency, and then from people who did not want to be the only ones sitting, which is fine because not all support comes pure. Sometimes it is borrowed from the nearest example, and I will take that when it moves the needle. And while they clapped I saw my brother smiling too loudly, the way a person does when he wants credit for staying calm, unaware that the presenter had already marked him in her mind as the helpful mic lead, which meant the narrative of being caught off guard would not stick anywhere outside his own head. I nodded once at my father the way polite people do when they are offered a seat at a table they built themselves, and I returned to my chair at the head table that had been reserved for the honoree, which a week earlier would have belonged to my brother. And I set the folder on my plate for a second like a placeholder nobody could move, and in that place between the last clap and the first throat clear, there was a silence that stretched so long it felt like another language altogether, a full minute where no one tried to make a joke or change the subject or pull the attention back to something easier, a minute that confirmed what I have always known but rarely enforced, that power is very quiet when it is real, and that you do not have to push for it to be seen once it has a microphone and witnesses. My father recovered faster than I expected, because practice is practice, and he complimented the community honors idea as if he had invented it, then slid into his welcome speech with minor edits that anyone else might have missed. A little extra emphasis on family pride that sounded like a man trying on a new jacket while pretending it fits perfectly, and I sat there with my hands folded and let him have that patch of dignity, because taking it would have made the point smaller, not bigger. And I had not come for a scuffle, I had come to change the altitude. The toasts began, and because the script forced titles and names to be read without trimming, the room had to practice fairness over and over, which wore down the old habit that kept me at the edge. And while that rhythm did its work, I leaned toward my mother and told her I had put a short note in the program toward the end, a thank you to the volunteers, and that when it was read there might be a mention of a new initiative I was starting. And she blinked in worry because new initiative sounds like disruption, and I said it would be brief and respectful, and she exhaled and squeezed my hand, because brief and respectful is the spell that calms her, and I let her keep it because the next part was not for her to carry. When the MC reached the closing acknowledgments, he read the line I had added in plain language that no one could object to without showing their hand. A thank you to the committee and to the venue and to everyone who traveled. Followed by one extra sentence that said a hiring program for veterans and military spouses would be piloted locally in partnership with 2 regional companies, with an information table by the exit for anyone interested in internships, referrals, or training, and that the program would be named after my grandmother, my mother's mother, who never got a chance to go to college but taught, in her living room, half the neighborhood how to write a resume when the mills closed. And that one sentence did something that no argument in a kitchen ever could, because it placed the spotlight on a woman my father never controlled and on a project that would make me useful to the exact people he tries to impress, which meant he could not attack it without insulting their interests, and it meant the last word on the night, the practical, future-facing word, belonged to me. The table by the exit had a short stack of forms and a simple sign with my grandmother's name and a contact email that routes to a volunteer team from the award office, and as people filtered out, I watched several of my father's contacts stop, write their names, and say things to me like, "We have been trying to get something like this off the ground, and we would love a meeting," and each of those sentences took pressure off my mother and put the weight where it should have been all along, on decisions and commitments and follow-through, none of which require a family referee. My brother tried a small save by suggesting we do a just us family photo without the uniform, which might have worked in another year, but Mrs. Bennett, who has instincts like a conductor, stepped in and insisted the honoree stay as she is because the program photographer needed a record for the committee archive, and my brother had to step aside while the board contact positioned himself 2 people from my father on purpose, the way men do when they are writing a new pecking order with their bodies, which allowed me the quietest last adjustment of the night, because I declined the front center and asked my mother to stand there instead, and when she hesitated, I told her this was named after her mother, and that she should be the center of that line. And she moved forward with a hand to her throat like she had misplaced something and suddenly found it. We did not fight, we did not yell, we did not rehearse the past, we just stood in a new arrangement while a camera clicked, and afterward people gathered their coats and containers and leftovers and drifted toward the table with the forms. And I hugged cousins and thanked volunteers and watched my father learn how to be quiet around a story that did not need him to narrate it, which, if you have never seen it, is a very particular kind of piece. On the way out, he caught my elbow and said I should have told him in advance because he could have framed it better, and I looked at him and said it did not need framing, it needed a minute of silence and the sound of my name spoken at full length. And he opened his mouth and then closed it because he understood on some level that the argument was over and that we were not going back to the old economy where my value could be budgeted down to keep his balance sheet tidy, and he nodded once in that stiff way proud men do when they will not say the words you want, but they know the math has changed. I went home with the citation on the passenger seat and the garment sleeve folded in the back, and my phone buzzed with messages from relatives who wanted to say they were moved and from 2 companies asking to set up a call, and from my mother. A simple line that said your grandmother would have loved tonight, and yes, she would have, and I sat there in my driveway for a while, not because I was replaying every look in line, but because I was enjoying the rare quiet that follows a plan executed without cruelty or apology, the kind where you do not have to fix anything in the morning, and where the people who underestimated you will have to do their repairs in private. If you are wondering whether it was too far, I will tell you what I told myself when I zipped the bag that morning, that I did not set out to humiliate anyone. I set out to make the truth the loudest thing in a room that had lived on euphemisms. And I did it in a way that will keep working after the chairs are stacked and the playlist ends, because the minute of silence was not an absence, it was a reset, and the last word was not an insult, it was an invitation with my grandmother's name on it. And that is the kind of revenge I can live with, the kind that feels less like a strike and more like a door that stays open whether anyone walks through it or not.